Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. Welcome to the Wanda Coleman Theater. My name is Quentin Ring. I am Beyond Baroque's Executive Director. We're thrilled to have this afternoon a special program presented with DoppelHouse Press. It is Interart and Iconotexts. We have 5 great poets here to read and to talk a little bit about the relationship between poetry and painting, the visual arts. So we'll dive right into that in just a moment. Before we get started, I did want to say a few words about Beyond Baroque. First, I think it's important that we start by acknowledging our presence here on Tongva land. We acknowledge the wrong done to indigenous peoples through genocidal practices, the violent dispossession of their land. And as an arts organization, Beyond Baroque is committed to upholding and uplifting indigenous communities, their narratives, and their art. Beyond Baroque is Los Angeles' oldest literary institution. We were founded in 1968 by George Drury Smith. And we exist to support writers, to nurture new writing, to present contemporary literature and art. We do that in a variety of ways. We have a reading and performance series. We have about 3 to 4 events a week right here in this theater, mostly on the weekends. Most of that's poetry, but we certainly have fiction, playwriting sometimes. We have movies, we have film, we have dance. We have just about everything that could happen in Art Center does happen in here once in a while. We also have writing workshops. We have 2 free weekly workshops, our Monday fiction workshop and our Wednesday poetry workshop. The Wednesday poetry workshop has been running continuously since 1969. A huge swath of LA's better known poets have come out of that workshop over the years. We also have individual master classes. Usually those are on weekends, on Saturdays. You can come and have 2 or 3 or 4 hour class on poetry, on fiction, etc. We also have an art gallery, the Mike Kelly Gallery, which you can see our current exhibition right now is Vincent Johnson's 17 Place Vendôme. It's more of a historical analysis of the origins of modern art, which as he's been doing, he's both an artist and an independent scholar. And he's been tracing the ways in which pretty much the entire intellectual and financial architecture of the modern art world, starting in France in the early 18th century, was financed by the slave trade. And so it's a pretty groundbreaking set of documents he's compiled about that. There are several public programs associated with that coming up on May 23rd. He'll be here in conversation to talk about that project, as well as on June 13th as well. So please do come back for that and check out the gallery. We also have a bookstore, of course. So if you like what you hear, if you like our poets' readings today, you can buy their books in the bookstore. It's a huge support to them. I'm sure they'd be willing to sign their books. I haven't asked them that, but usually they're willing. If they're not, that's their fault. Blame them, not me. But please do get their books. It's a support to us, but in particular, it's a support to them. We can't do what we do without the support of our members. Nonprofit spaces in the United States are very fragile. There's not a lot of government funding. There's not a lot of public support. And so we do depend on our community. So we do have a membership program that starts as little as $60. If you become a member, you can get a free tote bag. You get a discount to all of our paid workshops, a discount in the bookstore. You keep events like this free. So it is a really huge help. So please do consider seeing Jimmy in the bookstore. You can sign up online and just check out our events more generally. Just a few words of thanks too. I'd like to thank our staff in particular for making this event happen. We have Eric Alberg in the booth, our programs manager, Yvonne Salinas, Jimmy Vega, our associate director. I'd also like to thank in particular Carrie Patterson of DoppelHouse Press, who's brought us all here together and suggested this program. Yes. Where's Carrie? I don't know where Carrie's sitting now. There she is, back there. So really, we've worked on a few programs with Carrie and DoppelHouse Press in the past, and it's always just a real pleasure. And so I'm really grateful to have you back in the space again. And of course, a big thank you to all of our poets. And I think without further ado, we should get into the program. So what each poet's going to do is they're going to read, and there's going to have some slides, some examples of visual art that they'll accompany the reading and maybe say a few words about. And then at the end, there'll be an open Q&A with the authors for folks to ask questions. So as you listen and as they read, please do, if you have something you'd like to ask, keep it in mind. You'll have a space to ask those questions at the end of the program. So we will start with Ed Schad, who is a curator, writer for art and cultural publications, and poet. His first collection of poetry is Letters Apart, a collaboration with painter Liat Yossifor. He is curator and publications manager at The Broad, where he recently curated the exhibition and wrote the catalog for William Kentridge in Praise of Shadows. So please, everybody, welcome Ed Schad. I apologize. We switched the order around a couple times. David Starkey actually is going to say a few words about ekphrastic poetry, but you will be reading at the end, right? Okay, so please everybody welcome David Starkey, one of our poets. He's going to say a few words about ekphrastic poetry, which is poetry about visual arts. So please everyone welcome that. My apologies.
Sorry about that. So Carrie asked me to say a few words, so I jotted down a few notes. I know that you all know that ekphrastic poetry is poetry, at least as we see it now, about art. Initially, it was about any sort of written description. And so there's obviously ekphrasis in genres besides poetry. I'm thinking of one of my favorite novels from the 19th century, The Marble Faun, about young Americans in Rome. And obviously, there's also music about art, Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. But I do think that the lyric poem, which is what we're going to be reading today, fits well. It's a good container for static, art, a drawing, a painting, sculpture. And it's interesting, as I was looking through some of the most famous poems in English literature are ekphrastic. First one is actually German literature, but it's the Archaic Torso of Apollo by Rilke. You'll recall that comes down to the line, "For here there is no place that does not see you," and then it has that whammy of an ending, "You must change your life." And then Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts with the famous opening about suffering. They were never wrong, the old masters, how well they understood the human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. There's obviously something about looking at a work of art that makes us respond to it. I think probably the most famous ekphrastic poem is Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, which, as you recall, concludes with the lines, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all you know on earth and all you need to know." And Keats says of the urn that it, quote, "can express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme." But that's really where the tension is, I think, in ekphrastic poetry, because the poet wants to honor the work of art, yet we also are kind of trying to outshine it too, in a way. So, ekphrastic poems, I thought of some of the things that when I'm writing one, what am I thinking about? The description for sure, but then what sort of description? Do we report really detailed elements of what we're looking at, or do we use the language of metaphor for something that's already an active metaphor, writing about poetry or writing about art? Exposition. How do we let the reader know what the piece is about? So we can introduce that if we're at a reading like this, but I think you kind of have to discreetly smuggle in information about the work. To what extent are we bound by what we're actually seeing? So, is the work just a starting point that you go somewhere else, or is it like the planet that the poem orbits around? And then, point of view, that always demands attention. So are you writing from the perspective of the artist, or a person or a thing that's actually in the work of art? Or is it just you looking out at it? And if it is the work in some kind of platonic ideal space, or are you looking at it in a gallery, a cold, dimly lit gallery that's noisy? Or are you looking at it on your computer? So at my poems, which you'll hear in a bit, I'm addressing Caravaggio directly about his poems as though he were still alive and could respond to me. Of course, he never gets the chance to do that. But that's really, just wanted to sort of get a few ideas going. I'm sure our poets will have a lot more to say about that, and we will have a good bit to say about that ourselves during the Q&A. And now, here he is, Ed Schad.
Thank you very much. I actually like that idea about the orbit, that the poem kind of orbits around the work of art, which so my collection of poetry is a collaboration with Liat Yossifor, who I wish was here. I miss Liat, and she's at a fancy art residency right now. Good for her. She's an extraordinary painter, extraordinary person, and so many of the poems in this collection were during this dialogue that we developed during the pandemic, where I was feeling isolated, she was feeling isolated. She was making these extraordinary works on paper. She was posting them on Instagram, and I said, Liat, I want to write poems about that. Can I write poems about that? Sorry, I already had written poems about that. So that was how this started, and so many of them are based on weird little conversations we have, like never wanting to go out for a drink with Max Beckmann, things like that. So they're all very short and relatively painless. So I'll read some for you today. Thank you for being here. And I was actually in that Beyond Baroque workshop many years ago, and I very much valued my time there. So the poems, this is the most direct one about the pandemic. The rest really don't seem to address the pandemic at all. Blue pandemic, empty over Highway 40, Navajo corn sky, drapes down, blue mines, bluish lips, tangled up in blue, blue refrigerators behind hospitals, blue masks in the grass. One morning in June, a navy Neil Diamond t-shirt in the birthday mail. Another shirt ordered in midnight, at midnight, arrived in black. Instant blue over the fields, riven and shattered by gold electric strikes, then pitter-patter rain. Marion blue monochrome, mom's favorite color. Blue Sharpie marks filling calendar days and months. Blue mesas on isolated desert pages. Petrified trees. A slice of blueberry pie on a blue plate. Divers dead in 100 caves at the blue hole. One blue candy in my blizzard. My dad in a blue shirt. Under that blue sky, on the porch, stop the blue. This one's more fun. This is about my crazy little nieces and nephews that when they come into a room, they disrupt the world. What can I say? So this one's a little bit more linear. There's kind of a monster in there. On an invaded bookshelf battlefield with a Danish amputee-legged table, a couch with hand-picked upholstery formed an assaulted circle flanked by two upright chairs. Across a parade ground of rugs, from wood floor hinterlands, they marched out. Visible, gripping lidded cups and crackers, blocks and Legos, a kraken infantry of ruin with slim books and bears. With flares of noise from blinking consoles, unrelenting and crazy, unformed and guerrilla, they volleyed victory at the towers of concern. So that's for little Nate and Joe and Katie. Oh, this is a darker one. Okay. So this one is loosely based on an incident that about cleaning out a feed store. A feed. I grew up on a farm, and my grandpa had this this storage place where he stored grain. And after he died, it lay dormant for many, many years. And my brother eventually cleaned it out, and literally had a very horrifying day. And that's what this poem is about. The shed had stored the season's grain. Gradually, empty sacks piled its floor with fermenting leftovers from his last days, his last feedings, the last bags of seed he stacked, then tossed to tight teeth. Now the aftermath, the snakes, multiplying over the course of years, moving in the trash, their silver ropes twisting and terrible, their gunmetal tubes sliding and devouring in cornflower panic. Okay. This was written on a crazy 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what was happening here. Anyway, forgive me. Under a refrigerator lamp, looming distant on the shelf, a block of butter, the inscrutable heart of the kitchen. I removed it from its keeper on the veined formica to sit like nothing else around, throbbing yellow in the low light. I thought of a dull knife, but the knife was wrong. So I placed my hands around the mechanical curves, pressing gradually into the moisture, closing my fingers to spurt the fat and oils graphically out into the air. The glob turned into a slather with lumps to squeeze, all turning warm, and the warmth of me, my substance, not of clay, but of churned skim of milk, a toss of salt and molecules, now energetically on my face, onto my chest, down into my joints, over my legs and knees and toes, everywhere, a joyful mess. It's not quite literal. I don't know. Oh, okay. Can we advance the next slide? That's a horrible poem. I don't want to. Oh, this one's good because this one's about Beckman. Liat and I love Max Beckman for his complexity and for who he is and his cantankerousness and how rough his pictures are. And I don't know, I think this poem basically comes out of this sick little yellow stripe up there. Mac Beckman has this extraordinary view. It's like the darkest view you could ever have of a beach. He doesn't want to be there anyway. And Liat and I love Max Beckman. So this is about Max Beckman and the conversations I have with Liat about Max Beckman. An azure horizon rose to meet the sun, magnanimous, bestowing the gift of a breeze and gentle purple light onto a beach of morning sand as a couple shared a smile. I felt them casting their grace my way as I sat there, legs up and eyes out, a man in summer wearing fur, inside my fortress, screaming out curses into the air. That's for Max. And the next. And this, I guess, will be last one. Yes. This one is a bit of a list. I love these list poems that people do. Actually, this one is based on extraordinary reading. Once I came here, Lynn Thompson gave a reading here, and she's maybe the best poet of lists. I love her list poems. So this is short, and then that'll be it. Thank you for listening. This is what I lost. The working mystery of how the land slowly enters the body. Candy boxes, Twix especially, in the freezer. Stainless steel cereal bowls, sweating with milk. Open claws, arching back, but unable to pinch a well-placed hand on a crawdad's abdomen. Meadowlark leaps, and bow tie flourishes of the scissortail flycatcher out in a limitless field. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Ed, please. Thank you. Thanks, Ed. Next up, we have Joanna Roche, who is the author of numerous essays on contemporary art, as well as 2 books of poetry, Tyrannical Angels and Then.Now.If. She is professor of art history at Cal State Fullerton and holds a PhD in art history from UCLA. Currently at work on a 3rd poetry collection, she continues to be inspired by the talent and work ethic of her students. Please, everyone, welcome Joanna Roche.
We'll talk more in the Q&A, but coming up, I was thinking of the irony that I teach and think about and live contemporary art and modern art, but the things I'm reading on today are all very ancient, except for one. So, all right. Okay. Across the aisle, I miss you, Avalokiteshvara. What signal were you flashing me in the green corridors of the Norton Simon? What mudra of "you make me crazy" could I ever come up with that would put me back in time, your bronze butt facing me all these many years? We posed on the wooden stage of never leaving. Did you know the hole in your lost wax head would be so large? I was birthed before you and from no man's head, but we joined and our minds touched in time. This is actually, medieval manuscript referred to as the Getty Tondal. So I borrow the famous expression, ut pictura poesis. Without images, there is no poetry. Like Tondal, sated from too rich repasts, dreams of hell where demons lurk like deep sea fish, luminous and gold. I dream of sinking deep with you, our frail limbs entwined, we drift from fire to ice and back, like those whispers from some steady hand. Am I the blue-robed angel and you the slender, strong Tondal, naked and unafraid? I point to niches in heaven's wall where the bad, but not very, pose in their prolonged discomfort, perhaps because they wore in life neither blue nor nakedness very well. And like her, I pull back the soft pink folds from that exquisite tent to listen to the sound of strings as faint and clear as your daughter's voice. This was written in the 90s, which is an eternity ago, but the original, memory of this when I wrote was from childhood visits to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, where I grew up, and my mother introduced me to the field that would, fast forward 30 years, become my profession. So not Etruscan, but art. So Etruscan epitaph. They faced an easy journey from life to death, reclining on an elbow, a knee raised, a look of amused understanding about each face, that archaic smile only ancients knew. He woke her early with a kiss, and she opened wide her arms and full breast to his gentle gaze, and they would lie then as now entwined among those gauzy sheets, his pointed beard resting on her upswept curls. I spent a lot of time with this guy. This was the PhD, so yeah. So I probably have written more outlines about books on Cornell since the dissertation, but I have gotten a few poems out. Ode to the Last Outline, or What I Learned from Joseph Cornell. Look at objects across history. What has Cornell taught? Thought. To look inside, to connect, to cross time for those we love, to see objects as beyond things to meanings, reckoning objects we glimpse beyond, save, recover, reignite, new uses and understandings between old and now. What stays is so dear and soon departed. The histories of forgotten lives and loves, and sometimes art, brings my tears into motion, into time to speak. And then, yeah, this is, thank you, Carrie, for checking the artist. I did not know this, but this was kind of an ode to my daughter who spent a lot of years in New York. New York poem for Bree in 3, first part, 4th Ave. The Cure sings as I watch you backlit in soft bottle light, present and beautiful, and I am whole, home, young, fun, free, me again. Part 2, Grand Central Station ceiling. Pisces looks ahead, yet too much back, chained by the twin moves of what if and what's next. You, Aquarian, pour yourself into the lives of others full force, but with less regret. You know how to let go. Somewhere on the streets, a sticker reads, kindness is cool. Weird to be finally in fashion. I taught you well, but I'm sorry for the pain kindness can bring. There's no other way to live, I've found. Part 3, superpower. We had big drinks, and I met the love of your life. You showed me a dance, room where I can always smile. Thank you.
Some more applause for Joanna, please. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. Next up, we have Eve Wood, who is an artist, art critic, and the author and or illustrator of 7 collections of poetry and chapbooks. Her artwork has been shown internationally, and a documentary about Wood, Unfurled, has just been released. She is currently represented by Track 16 Gallery and will have a solo exhibition at the Riverside Museum of Art in October. It's also a real pleasure to welcome Eve because Beyond Baroque Books published, was it your first book? Yeah, so it's a special pleasure to have her back in the space. Please, everybody, welcome Eve Wood.
Yes, it's like old home week. Haven't been back here since Paper Frankenstein was published in 1998. I realize everyone's talking about poetry, lyric poetry specifically, and I am a lyric poet, but this book is actually not a book of poetry. I think of them more as sort of personified narratives. Or I guess you would say free-form poems or prose poetry, just to make the distinction. I was listening to all those beautiful poems and realizing these aren't really poems, but here we go. The other thing you should know is that this book was is a compilation of from a column that I do for Artillery magazine called Remarks on Color, which is still going to this day. And this is 3 years worth of this column, which are basically personified voices of colors. And I started it during COVID because, for obvious reasons, right? My mind was wandering and they needed content. So I owe a huge debt to Tulsa Kinney, Artillery Magazine, and Carrie Patterson for allowing me this opportunity. So other thing you should know is that I am obsessed with birds. So all 3 of these are written in the voices of birds. Merry Weather Blue. Meriwether Blue decided to become a nun and start her own order, separate from the archdiocese, but more aligned with the high-flying nuns of Costa Rica, those avid, though seldom-seen forest dwellers for whom the soul can only be awakened in accordance with the sky. To say she encountered great resistance would be an understatement, as several high-profile cardinals in Rome put a hit out on her, even going so far as to track her flight patterns with infrared light and high-powered drones. But she was much too agile for them, even wearing that damnable whipple. As a newly sanctified believer, Meriwether Blue got to work building orphanages for children in Somalia, administering free medical care for pregnant women in Nigeria, and hiring engineers to bring fresh water to the smallest villages in Burundi. All in all, it was a very satisfying work indeed. She even started giving flying lessons to the local macaws whose wings had grown sad and weary. These were the most exhilarating moments of her life, and certainly the most holy. As an experiment, she offered communion against a fierce and luminous sky rather than the old smelly pews downing the usual stale crackers and Kool-Aid. She wanted to spice things up, to send the sparrows reeling in the air and the fantails dizzy with anticipation. Never one for proselytizing, Meriwether Blue tried to recruit only within her immediate flock, those taciturn flyers for whom the daily pains of living had simply gotten to be too much, and the divine rarely lit up the heavens. These were the birds that needed her the most, though there was one grumpy old fart named Walter, whose daily protestations and vegetable-throwing fits really chapped her hide. But even Walter was capable of earning a place at that much-coveted table in heaven, even if he pooped as he flew at lunchtime above an open-air restaurant, strategically aiming for someone's beet salad. For the next color, I will endeavor to channel the voice of Helena Bonham Carter, and you'll see why. Parakeet green. Mostly, you hear him coming long before the bright and flowing flourish, which is his body, floats across the speedway. Being that he's a dandy from Kensington, he much prefers the moniker Budgie to the more pedestrian Keat. An avid smoker of Players and Dunhills, Parakeet Green would never be seen puffing menthols or rolled tobacco, at least not in public. There has been some debate as to the provenance of his color, some suggesting a more pearlescent green suffused with what can only be described as lemon zest, while others have identified a downy tangerine streak lurking just beneath the surface. Parakeet Green deigns to position himself on either side of the debate, preferring instead to remain discreetly and luminously fluid, a verifiable melange of bursting color, proffering something for everyone who turns to gaze upon this avian extraordinaire. Parakeet Green can often be found posing for photographs with ardent admirers in and around St. James Park, with its view of Buckingham Palace, alongside all manner of other feathered detractors, including the hideous and ubiquitous pigeon with its ever-bobbing disco ball head, the dunnock, a common center of low-flying means and common breeding, and the fierce little coal-tit circling the highlands in masked abandon in response to the calls of the tawny owl. Parakeet Green is secretly searching for a counterpart in high society, a budgerigar of impeccable breeding, mischievous and ever loquacious, a bird among birds, a partner in crime, a downy compatriot with whom to pass the time, and oh, what a time it will be! soaring over the headlands, wing to finally eschew the mandatory tea sessions, the interminable chatter of gossip and mean-spirited jibes, endless visits to the Queen, sitting on her shoulder and forever trying hard not to poop. And finally, Rose matters. She does. She really does. An integral part of the community, Rose matters more than you might imagine. After all, where would we be without rose-colored glasses, rose hip tea, rose water, or some child's irresistible rosy cheeks in Buffalo, New York in the dead of winter? Rose does matter. However, sometimes she matters in ways she could not have anticipated. For example, she is single-handedly responsible for the phenomenon that is known as rosacea, where countless folks suddenly find themselves with impossibly rosy, itchy, blistery, bleeding skin, especially among middle-aged women with very fair complexions. In the Orson Welles movie Citizen Kane, Rosebud is the cheap little sled on which Kane was playing on the day he was unceremoniously taken away from his home and his mother. This association has haunted Rose Matters for decades, causing her tremendous personal turmoil, as she strongly identified with little Rosebud, the wayward sled left behind in the snow. Sometimes people confuse poor Rose Matters with other, less desirable rose-like afflictions, which she, of course, has nothing to do with. Necros, for example, or pleurosis, as in Tennessee Williams' famed Glass Menagerie, where Laura Wingfield suffers from a terrible lung disease that sounds like blue roses. Rose Matters is often confused with Rose Matter, the Stephen King novel about a woman married to an abusive, belligerent man whom she flees to start a new life in a neighboring town and then rescues a child from inside a painting's mysterious labyrinth. It's a cautionary tale about treachery, abuse, redemption, and bad art. And Rose Matters takes particular offense at being misrepresented as a shape-shifting, sinister oil painting whose central color is, you guessed it, rose. Oscar Wilde would certainly have had a field day with her. Thank you.
Eve Wood, everyone. Yes. Thank you, Eve. Next up, we have Ed Rosenthal, who is an author, poet, and a real estate broker. He has published 2 books of poetry and a memoir, Salvation Canyon. The socially oriented poetry combines the diversity of issues from real estate deals, minority contractors, to homelessness, and has been published in the Wall Street Journal and Los Angeles Times, amongst others. It's always a pleasure to have Ed with us. Please, everybody, welcome Ed Rosenthal.
Hey, why do I have to read after a great reader like that? But, you know. My poem raises questions about it's ekphrastic poetry, but it could be ekphrastic sorcery. In other words, what happens when an art is so powerful that it produces a different thought pattern in the poet who's trying to write about it. And that has been my experience with this mural. Mystical Mural of Power, a series of old and new poems dedicated to La Calle de Eternidad, the mural by artist Joanna Roche, placed in 1992 on 3533 Broadway to help lift downtown. Prayers are raised on gold-burnished charcoal hands, straddled with symbols of Mesoamerican history, as the gold-garbed priest projects explosive power. Lightning shakes his frizzy hairdo of zigzag gold curls. Standing in regal crimson red quarters, he commands that circular holy seal of poet Octavia Paz's sounds in white letters inscribed on expanding blue circles to echo enthusiastically and fill the city with vowels, to repeat as sounds repeople streets of the center. The royal summons, burnished and gold dappled, during the dismal days of 1992, the spells placed there on 4th and Broadway, and a cash recovery started within 1,000 days, only 1 block from the art. Nobody wants to argue with this priest. That was a joke. I'm sorry if I have to tell you. A dashing developer then captured our hapless city's heart. New business orgs allowed in laws appeared in the moment. Brilliant changes were birthed in building codes and designs of bureaus born to bring back local treasures and whirling memories of red car trains on rails and frizzy wires revived. Here are my own vowels and consonants voiced to a landlord in the era of revocalized streets. Gilmore can't pay. Gilmore can't pay for the extension of escrow I'm requesting today. But if you take my advice, you'll stay by his side as he shifts to downtown overdrive. Friends, whoever you call better have wisdom and wherewithal. When some look down Main, they only feel pain. But that's not our Tommy's song. When they look up Fourth, they feel distraught. But he has loftier thoughts. My dearest clients, don't greet him in silence. It's a natural alliance. It's timely, not a waste. While the market's disgrace has placed us in fidgeting digits. I forgot to do my introduction to this poem and make comments about what it signifies, but mainly it's about how a powerful symbol can affect a poet who's trying to write about it and finds his mind influenced so heavily that he can't really write about it detached from the symbolism that the artwork implies to him. And I forgot to thank my wife for showing up here at this show. She's sitting in the audience, my wife, Nicole. Can you imagine being a wife and dealing with a husband who is a poet and a real estate broker? Oh my God, there's so much uncertainty. Here are my phrases of dispraises for the county's fecklessness. I've stolen those words from Terence Dupree in his wonderful work about poetry. The homeless are here to stay. The homeless are here to stay. The county said it yesterday. The city said it today. The homeless are here to stay. Not in all districts, they say. Only downtown, they say. Getting back to my relationship with this singular mural, my 2010 near-death experience in the Mojave, described in Salvation Canyon, my DoppelHouse Press book, is what most likely helped me understand the mysterious power of this mural. These are poems excerpted from The Desert Hat, my Moonrise Press publication. Shadows. He became a shadow that listened for clues, for new wisdom, before he left his mask behind, like a black shade sitting at a white table, covering a buddy's arm, and part of a coffee cup, wondering in silence if he'd hear hints of changes in his friend, which he might credit to his own tale of near death. Coyote. You stood blocking the trail marker where I dropped from sight that day. Misunderstood signal, I thought you random as the park pump by the hidden sky of water tower. Lifted out by copter wings, pumped by hospital fluid, when I got home, I found you. Illustrated in my room, inside a copper slice of a silver ring. I'll never take off again. Ode to a Fly. Wonderful insect, may I never see you stuck to a glue strip on yellow paper. Loyal voyager, we escaped sandflies, slept on the black rock, and returned to the cliffs. When my mother-in-law woke up us both, screaming my name under a black sky. Dearest horsefly, canyon homemaker, odd couple member, skinny-legged friend. But none of that suggests why, decades earlier, I appointed myself sheriff and protector of this mysterious piece. So that goes unexplained. This afternoon's poem for Mother's Day, Power of Place, which, as you know, is quite a long tradition in poetry, describes the limitations location places on even the greatest witchcraft. On 4th and Broadway, where they place this art, events get in the way and chaos plays a part. Dreaming of a safe space, $300 million tried to escape out of Shanghai, but was buried sky high. And on the night of those flames, with the corner smoking dark, the police never do explain why their film skipped that part. On the night of those flames, with the corner burning apart, the cops never could explain Why did your film skip that part? And this is the very corner of the councilman court, with a bag stuffed with cash a developer brought. It's in that city where the departments can't find this now missing mural, divinely inspired. Thank you.
Ed Rosenthal, everybody. Thank you. And our final reader is David Starkey, who served as Santa Barbara's 2009 to 2011 Poet Laureate, founding director of the creative writing program at Santa Barbara City College. He is currently co-editor of Anacapa Review and the California Review of Books, and publisher and co-editor of Gunpowder Press. Caravaggio will be published by Pine Row Press in August. You've already heard him talk about ekphrasis and poetry, but please welcome him for a reading, David Starkey, everyone.
Thanks, Quentin, and thanks Beyond Baroque and also to Carrie for putting this together. So my book, Caravaggio, is a biography in poems, and I'm going to read 6 poems from there. Some of the poems are more sort of move his story forward, but these are pretty ekphrastic, and 4 of them were published in the Nomadic Journal, including this one. And I'll tell you the title and the date in which it was painted. Bacchus, 1596. The fruit continues to rot. A wormy apple, a putrefying peach, a pomegranate so ripe it is split open like a knifed gut. Everything's breaking down into simple sugars, water, mineral salts. The stench is marvelous, but Bacchus doesn't care. He's young, young always. The wine is drinkable. The night also is young. And if you know Caravaggio's work, which I'm sure you do, he's not someone who flinches away from unhappy subject matter. St. Catherine of Alexandria, 1598. Like so many saints, she embraces the instruments of her torment. She leans against the spiked wheel on which Maximus meant to break each of her exquisite bones, as though it were the backrest of a pillowed chair. And why not? God's thunderbolt has splintered the device, mocking its cruel intent. Of course, her persuasive powers, dozens converted to the true faith, cannot go unpunished. Therefore, she strokes the smooth steel of the rapier that will slice off her head, fondling its complicated hilt. Kneeling on a red silk cushion, a martyr's palm at her feet, she is the picture of nuptial vigilance, alert to the sound of her bridegroom opening their chamber door, then striding towards the bed as he wets his thumb and middle finger to extinguish the taper's flickering light. And this is Supper at Emmaus, 1601. Perhaps you, Caravaggio, sympathize with the risen Christ, who walks through the world unrecognized even by his disciples. If so, that's you at the table, right arm outstretched over a meal of roast fowl, brown bread, water, wine, and a basket of rotting fruit about to topple to the floor. You look down at the tablecloth, its faint gravy stains like an atlas of heaven. Yes, 2 of the 3 men finally see you. Luke with his coat out at the elbows, an astonished red-nosed Cleopas. But the innkeeper only glares at a man he's certain is about to vanish without settling his bill. I have spent a good bit of time in Rome, which is where I came across Caravaggio's paintings in the flesh. This is one of the really great ones, the Madonna of Loreto, 1604. This old kneeling couple, the man's breeches patched and practically bursting, the old woman's headscarf torn, and yet their eyes are luminous, their hands fiery in prayer. Though the Madonna who has appeared to them on the doorstep of this minor church gazes down with condescension, her child's feet dangling in the old man's face. None of it matters. The poor in spirit are eternally blessed. The secret of your success, Caravaggio, is the secret of your undoing. Real people transported by bliss remain ragged. Alas, popes now are tiring of the poor, cardinals too, and their underlings. If heaven were here on earth, they reason, what would be the point of adorning chapels in gold when it could be spent on bread and blankets and shoes to shod an old couple's cracked and dirty feet? The Flagellation of Christ, 1607. And Caravaggio, as you may know, had to run away from Rome after getting in a fight with someone at a tennis match. She stabbed the guy. So he went to Naples. Safe for the moment in the kingdom of Naples, flush with lucrative commissions from art-starved abbots and cardinals, you might have selected a more pleasant scene for your latest altarpiece. The healing at Bethesda Pool, say, or the calming of the storm on the Sea of Galilee. But no, your vision thrives on savagery. Christ with his hands behind his back, bound to a pillar, one brute kicking him below the knee, another pulling at his hair in preparation for a thrashing, while a third bends down to bind a bundle of twigs ahead of joining in the torture. O Jerusalem, how like the narrow Neapolitan alleys you look, edged by shadows, rank with the menace of unhappy men. And I will finish up with it's a really dark painting. Hopefully my poem will pick out some of the details. The beheading of St. John the Baptist. His throat is already slashed, but the head remains tethered to the body. So his executioner draws a shorter, sharper blade from the scabbard and grabs the Baptist's long hair in preparation for the final severing. Though blood pools by his throat, John is still alive, conscious of those around him. The two prisoners in the dank and sunless dungeon, peering through the window of their barred cell. The jailer with his belt of massive keys. The white-haired woman with her hands to her cheeks, fetched in as a witness to the headsman's handiwork. And the stone-faced serving girl who holds out the gold platter for the trophy's triumphant march upstairs to the bedroom of Herod and Salome. As you, Caravaggio, dab the final touches of paint on the canvas, white on the rope binding the saint's hands behind his back, lead tin yellow on the jailer's bald pate. The Knights of Malta gather behind you in the oratory of St. John's Cathedral, murmuring to one another, amazed by your magic, yet wary of it too. Like you, they keep the hilts of their swords close to hand in the inevitable event of treachery. Like you, they sign their names in blood. Thank you.
Give it up for David, please. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a scene change right now and just get rid of this podium and invite our authors up for a little open Q&A with the audience. So give us just a moment, and if you have some questions, formulate them, and we'll give you a chance to ask them. Thanks so much. I knew that was going to happen. Just, we'll have more of my... Just give us 1 second until I head back.
That's where I should have gone. Wilshire Space. Yeah. That was her first space. Yeah, before she was. Oh, wow. Is it up now? Oh, okay.
All right, thanks everybody. This is pretty much an open Q&A, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Eric, if you wouldn't mind raising the lights a little bit, so just so the our panelists can see the audience. Otherwise, feel free to ask whatever's on your mind. Or if you guys have any comments as well, feel free.
Can I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So this is for Joanna Roche, because with your Joseph Cornell fascination and all the work that you've done on him, I was really interested in that picture, and I'm curious if you could talk about your relationship to objects and seem to have taught you about this, and maybe wanted to do.
Asking. Thanks for all your support. Generally, with my work and so many.
You might want to use that.
Yeah, the Cornell. That's, as I said, kind of an old relationship. Unlike, say, the Tondal, that first medieval manuscript, where I know nothing about medieval art other than the freshman class I slept through in college, right, and the one I had, GA for in grad school, but where I'm sort of drawn into something that I really don't know very much about, and I'm not in my interpretive art historian mindset. With the Cornell, there was so much research and so much kind of shadowing him through New York and through his archives that when it came to writing about his work in a kind of non-academic way, it was, that particular poem was a moment of intense frustration when I literally did something stupid on the computer and forgot to save an outline that I had been working on, and so it became this kind of way of coping with that loss. It was the projected idea of yet another piece of academic writing about Cornell, and so I just kind of took that moment to just recover and wrote a poem. But I think one of the things about Cornell that continues to interest me, and perhaps decreasing teaching loads and administrative work, which may happen at some point, I can pick up some of those threads, but is his complex relationship with objects that are also very simply parsed, right? So he reduces his spaces, whether it's films or boxes or collages, into these very lean stage-like spaces where every object or every newspaper clipping or image, he did some with Caravaggio's, these are all prints, it has a kind of aura and valency, and so that is something that continues my fascination with him, that it's not just the placement or the composition or the history of his relationship to stars of the past or artists of the past, but in fact how he makes objects kind of pulsate through time, and I do think our present moment of thinking about how much materiality we have on this planet, and what, in a sense, how we're going to cope environmentally and how we do cope. I find him still very important in my thinking about how I deal with the minutia of daily life and the objects of daily life and expand out from there. So he's not my typical kind of go to the museum and find some companionable conversation going on with the artwork. That's more coming from so many years of in-depth, detailed research. But then, yes, I said it. The loss of something that I thought was going to be important, I decided, well, I can write a short ode and maybe that'll summarize more than any 300-page book would say. So.
That's beautiful. I love when you frustrating happens and you create something beautiful out of it instead of.
I'm sorry.
You create something beautiful out of a frustrating moment.
Yeah,
That's creative.
I think he probably did that a lot with his objects too.
This
Yes.
is for Eve Wood. You write and you paint and you write poetry and fiction, and I wondered which is the most satisfying to you in the long run.
You should know this, you're my girlfriend. Or is this coming from my chihuahua? Is this a question for her? Oh, the chihuahua's asking? Okay. So which is more important, or?
Which is more satisfying for you?
Well, I guess they have varying levels of satisfaction. I have a common practice of making art all the time. So I'm constantly making art since I went to Cal Arts and back, centuries ago. I've just always been doing that, and poetry also. So I think they're kind of sort of symbiotic. They kind of work together. I go through periods where I write more and then I make more art. If I have an exhibition coming up, I'll make more work, and then the poetry but it's always there, kind of like a hum in the background of my mind, that something I'm going to work on. I'm working on a book now in the voice of Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West, kind of taking the premise of if Virginia Woolf had not killed herself, what kinds of conversations would they have had together after that? And that's what I'm dealing with now. I'm thinking about those, reading their letters, etc. So I hope that answers the question. But thank you.
Which one do you prefer? There's none.
I guess I don't really think of it as a preference so much as a necessity. Like sometimes I feel like I have to do this, and then other times that urge dissipates and the other comes to the fore. So it just depends on sort of where I am in my teaching schedule and all the rest of those things, as we all probably understand that up here. But thank you. Thank you, Mushroom. Good question.
This question is Ed, and I struck by the color in a lot of your. Do you read this time? Describing slithering snakes or viscosity of butter, how those descriptions and images become like marks, and they seem to create based on a Liat Yossifor words seem to create another picture. I'm wondering the work that way, marks, color, creating writing or education.
Cool. Thank you, Dion. I want to thank Dion. Dion designed the book, and I was happy to look up and see that you're here. Hello, Dion, and thank you, Carrie, so much for taking on this project. So Liat works in a very, I think it's a strange way. It's a beautiful way that she makes her paintings. Is that she'll start out in a picture and it's on a timer. So she cannot work on a painting longer than it takes oil to dry. And as oil dries, it gets harder and harder to work with. And so she'll move from brushes to knives and carving and things like this. But when it's over, and she can be spectacularly cruel to herself in dispatching a work if it's not working for her. She'll get rid of it immediately with with apparently no remorse and no regrets about it. She'll move on, and so thinking about how Liat works and how she starts with this like high flying viscosity slathers and the way that she starts and how it's slowly almost it'll turn to mud and then it'll turn to bronze, like this that movement from the initial lightning strike of inspiration into that that wooden end point. Of course, I mean that's a great thing to think about with words, about how they can run, they can stop, they can they can go slow, sometimes very far too slow. Liat made this painting, fantastic painting. All it made me want to think about was just, there was one time I was like waiting for my oil change, and it's like it like never ended. I mean, it was hours, and I just it's like lurking around this Jiffy Lube, trying to find a magazine, like learning about all the tires on the wall, and Liat's painting can get at that somehow, but she's thinking about Chagall, and she's thinking about the things that she thinks. She's thinking about her dog. She's thinking about hiking in the Hollywood Hills. This is kind of it's really magical how those things can come together through paint, through this strange medium that people obsess over. Anyway, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I got. Thanks, Dion. Oh.
I have a question actually that is a continuation of yours. Being that you wrote poetry and partnered with an artist, with specifically one artist, have you thought about doing that? And being that she's an abstract artist, so it really gives you, it's a different perspective every time, Is there any other artist that you would want to partner with that inspires you to write specifically poetry?
Sure. I mean, my day job is my only job is curating at the Broad Museum, and I work with artists for a long period of time, for years, to do their show, 2 or 3 years to get it on the wall from the first idea. And I always try to write poems. I wrote these awful poems about Jasper Johns. I worked with him for years on this survey. I only met him once, which was terrifying. But then I worked with Shireen Nishat for years. I wanted so much to write poems that are at Shireen's work, which are so layered in these beautiful poems from ancient and recent Iran. Couldn't do it. But I finished this and I immediately started writing Ghazals, like Arab and Iranian Ghazals, and that comes from Shireen. It's 100% from Shireen. But when I was working with her, I couldn't do it. Here's 5 years later, and I suddenly do it. So who knows?
I think the medium being that there's one that's very good with photography, even words in her own work. Shireen Schad, an artist who is abstract, and said that it's broader of how, because hearing your poetry sounded like very personal for you, versus her work is very personal for her. But an artist that has a very specific narrative, does that change it?
Well, kind of. I mean, what does the panel think? I think that I think what I would say is that like the exhibition I did, William Kentridge would say, it's like the poem has to be better than the poet, and so the poet is his, her, they's own disaster. and then the poem will eventually find what it needs. So it's hard to talk about these things. So which is another way of saying I don't know.
We'll wait for the next one.
You just said it.
When you decide to paint something, are you first drawn to the subject of the painting? Just anybody that wants to ask. The subject of the painting, or the lights, the way the artist uses lights and shadows and color, or all of that at once? And then my other question is this: has anybody thought that, when you go to gallery shows or things where they have the little placards telling you to have the poems side by side? Seems like it would be a really lovely idea to sort of do a group thing or collaborative thing. You always get to see like the year and the artist and the title, but to have some beautiful words beside it. Because yesterday I was telling one of my students that writers paint pictures with words. So in a way, you're looking at things that have been painted with brushes and then repainting them with words.
Well, I was attracted to that art strictly out of the image. As soon as I saw it, then it meant something special to me, personal. So that was the basis of my getting involved with it.
But then are you drawn in? Like when you first see that, are you then drawn in as you look deeper? Because honestly, when that one mural was up, I didn't even see the guy behind it at first. I just saw the hands, but then as I was listening to your words, I'm like, oh, look at that, there's hair. Oh, are those eyes? And so that's what I'm wondering is like, what initially catches your eye and then draws you deeper in where you think you can write it. Well,
what caught my eye was the priest in his gold garb, which may not have meant the same thing to the artist at all. So that's what I saw, and that's what dominated my poem, which actually, if you listen to the YouTube by the artist herself, I have to admit it has nothing to do with her, what she selected the imagery for, because she actually found these huge buildings downtown to be uplifting. And that was her main thing that she was reflecting upon, and not any cultural heritage that I might have picked up from that art. So.
And I have one more question. Do you ever find that your inference conflicts with whatever their painting is implying?
Well, certainly, I don't know if, yes, certainly, but even so, I feel like this is such powerful art that for whatever reason, it has a really strong effect, regardless of the intent of the artist. And unlike many of the people here, I really haven't studied ekphrastic poetry other than doing it in this case. So it was just like, wow, direct experience of this image that leads to everything.
I think that's interesting, because I felt like I have a contentious relationship with Caravaggio, who's been dead for 400 years. But I did feel like I was writing kind of back and forth to him and letting the paintings sort of talk back to me a little bit. And I liked that. I liked that I wasn't completely in sync with what he was doing, and that I sometimes thought the things that he did in his life are pretty despicable, but I just cherish those paintings. So I think that generates a little bit of energy. And I also, I'm from Santa Barbara. We had a thing at the museum where there were little QB codes. You just did that with your phone, and it would pop up and have a text of a poem, and you could listen to it. Yeah.
At the museum where you have the chalk stuff in front.
It's the old post office.
I would agree that it's a very it's a moment of impact or collision usually, as I said. Some poetry, art that I really not know, period, in a way that's kind of, I'm not over-intellectualizing, but I do agree, there's that immediacy, and I want to have a follow-up to this where we get painters in who are painting about poems that they've read, so.
That was the other. And how would you feel if some painter took one of your poems and made a painting about it, and if it clashed with what your intent was, if they got a complete different meaning from it, then in other words, if you reversed what you guys have done today?
I think it would be great, and I tell my students, I teach art students, and they don't always like to hear it, but it doesn't matter what you think about the work. Once it's out there,
yes.
It's out there, and if you want to lay your ground on it, then you better write a lot about it. So, but I like the idea that it's open.
I have another book coming out that I did with an artist friend, and my poems are about the gospel, but I'm an atheist, so they're kind of cynical. And my friend Rafael Correa de la Cabada is very, very devout, and so his charcoal drawings you just sense how much his belief is just kind of throbbing through there, and then it's juxtaposed with my poem that's sort of like what you heard with the Caravaggio, and again, that's that sort of tension between the two that I think is pretty neat.
Yeah.
David, will that be in a show?
That will be, if we could get a show, it would probably be in Ventura. Yeah.
David, is that you?
Yeah.
I only got to, I apologize that I was late and I didn't get to see because I didn't know I was coming here until today. So, David, I listened to, I think I kind of understand something. So you said that you're an atheist, right?
Right.
Now, you're also doing work of God as an atheist because you're looking at the darkness that is exposed in Caravaggio's work. And it's very violent images in Caravaggio's work, and you're putting words that are in plain sight in Caravaggio's work to people that are not these people, I just mean people in general. It's actually all in plain sight. If you look at those images, the beheading that you're describing is real, and you read the gospel, and that's real. And so it's interesting that you're doing God's work and you're an atheist because you're taking Caravaggio's dark work, right? And you're going to Caravaggio.
I think my friend Rafael would agree with what you said.
I think it's true, and so the answer is you have this gift, right? Do you leave enough space for the light because you're already doing God's work, and you're by exposing the truth of Caravaggio's darkness.
We got time for one more question if anybody has additional.
I'm curious about, for Ed, what did Liat, if you had, obviously you had conversations about, or her reactions about your poems of her paintings. I'm curious a little bit more about, if you could talk about her response.
Sure. Actually, it's building on your question because she ended up. Pandemic was so terrifying because it was just so much uncertainty, and there was a moment where I needed to go home to Texas, and I decided to take this road trip to Texas, and my wife Heather and I just sort of camped across the desert going to Texas, and I ended up writing this essay about it, and Liat subsequently made paintings in response to the essay, and it made me really shy for some reason. It was really, really strange to have someone make a painting about something that you've written. But most of the time, I get the email back, and Liat would write, "Wow, I don't know what to do with that one." Or yeah, so you know, some were really fun and some were very long responses, but the most beautiful and moving response for me was the painting that was made, the series of paintings that were made about the essay. That was fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Bookstore. You're just happy to sign, hang out at reception, and
Go DoppelHouse.